Chapter 074. Third turn. Simulacrum number 4 was worried. He really shouldn't be, considering what he was and how many times the original had fought the Grey Hunter by now. If anything, he should be feeling excited. He had a good feeling about this attempt. Their skills had grown. They had become intimately familiar with the Grey Hunter's capabilities, and they had brought a number of surprises designed specifically to counter it. This could work. This could actually work, unlike so many previous attempts they'd made. Maybe that was it. In their previous attempts, Zorian, and by extension Simulacrum number 4, had always felt the attempt was a long shot. Even if they failed, it was to be expected. This time he actually felt good about their chances, making him more emotionally invested in the outcome. Then again, they actually had a pressing need for the Grey Hunter's eggs this time. They could contact Silver Lake without them, but talking to Silver Lake was going to be much harder and much more annoying if they couldn't bring her something she desperately wanted. He unconsciously clutched the rifle closer to his chest, the sensation of it dispelling his current stream of thought. He remembered practicing with it over and over, but it still felt a bit alien to his mind, and so did the arms that held it. He was a brand new type of simulacrum that the original had thought up recently. Instead of being embodied into an ectoplasmic shell like a regular simulacrum, he had been attached to a real matter golem body designed to mimic the original. This was a step up from the base spell in just about every regard, granting him vastly increased durability and having his maintenance cost at the same time. It allowed Zorian to maintain twice the usual number of simulacrums and ensured that they wouldn't be destroyed by relatively minor damage. The only downside was that making the golem bodies was very time-consuming, and that the materials were expensive as hell. Or at least that was the idea anyway. The simulacrum actually felt significantly stiffer and more restricted in his movements than he was used to, a clear sign that his joints weren't working quite as well as the original had hoped they would. No doubt the original would find a way to fix or mitigate these issues as time went by, but that would make no difference for him personally. He really hoped he wouldn't lock up or miss in the actual battle because of this. Alas, the time for contemplation was over. A short message rippled out of his soul and into his consciousness, informing him and the other 3 simulacrums gathered around the area that the original was about to start the fight. He quickly checked up on his rifle one final time and then sent a confirmation that he was ready through the exact same method, using their shared soul as a conduit for communication. Very convenient that the original was already working on further upgrades, based on their studies of the Hydra and the Cephalic Rat Collective, but that was still in the initial stages and nowhere near ready for field use. For now, normal, soul conduit communication would have to suffice. And then it began. The Grey Hunter leapt out of its cave and immediately moved to attack Zack and Zorian, completely ignoring the simulacrums scattered around the area. A swarm of projectiles answered its charge, Zack and Zorian doing their best to keep it pressured without wasting too much of their mana reserves. Zack launched powerful beams of force at it, forcing it to keep dodging and breaking up its momentum. Zorian, on the other hand, borrowed Kerma's trick. Holding a grayish metal cube as a spell focus, he launched swarms of smaller, cheaper projectiles that homed in unerringly on the Grey Hunter's weak points. He timed his attack to coincide with Zack's, forcing the Grey Hunter to take at least a few hits from every barrage. Although individually weak and unable to truly threaten the Grey Hunter, they were apparently doing something because the spider was clearly getting angrier and more agitated as seconds ticked by. Simulacrum number 4 trailed the Grey Hunter with the scope of his rifle, but did not shoot. The Grey Hunter was currently ignoring the simulacrums because it did not perceive them as a threat, but that wouldn't last very long if they started blindly firing into the battle zone. No, if he and his duplicate brethren wanted to help Zack in the original, they needed to pick their moment carefully. The problem with using the gun on the Grey Hunter wasn't in whether or not it could dodge the bullet. It couldn't. To Zorian's knowledge, nothing was fast enough to dodge a projectile that moved faster than sound itself. The problem was that the spider never sat still long enough to get a good shot on it. Bullets didn't track their target, and using magic to make them do so was incredibly difficult. The most Zorian could do was curve their trajectories slightly towards where he wanted them to hit. And the simulacrums didn't just have to hit the Grey Hunter. They had to hit it in a way that left the egg sac unharmed. Basically, they needed the Grey Hunter to stay still for a second. A tall order, but the simulacrum was confident that Zack and the original could pull it off. The Grey Hunter lunged towards Zorian. Zack was a bigger threat, But Zorian was more annoying and probably looked more vulnerable to its senses. If it could get rid of the annoying weakling first, it could then focus its full attention on the true threat and its victory would be assured. But looks could be deceptive. The Grey Hunter smashed straight into Zorian's shield at full force and was stopped cold. The thick barrier of force that surrounded Zorian was a marvel of spell engineering. A custom spell that Zorian had designed with the help of a dozen professional spellcrafters to make maximum use of Zorian's exceptional shaping skills. The softly glowing threads, woven through every inch of the thick sphere of force, lit up like blazing lamps, distributing the incoming force away from the impact points and into the shield as a whole, lessening the strain on any individual point in the shield. The Grey Hunter attacked the shield again and again in quick succession, and it finally gave way. But rather than the whole shield shattering, 3 small hexagons of force broke down instead, leaving the main structure unharmed. Before the Grey Hunter could take advantage of that, the entire shield shifted and automatically rearranged itself, nearby hexagons sliding into place to close the gap. Suddenly aware that Zorian was no easy target to be brought down quickly, the Grey Hunter tried to back off, but it was too late. Zack had positioned himself carefully while the Grey Hunter had been trying to batter down Zorian's shield, and now launched a barrage of 3 hyperdense stone spheres at the spider. The Grey Hunter spun around like an acrobat, deflecting the spheres away from itself with measured kicks, but Zorian took advantage of its predicament to launch a pair of metal cylinders at it. The Grey Hunter, accustomed to weathering Zorian's annoying but weak attacks and not seeing any great concentration of mana in the cylinders, chose to ignore them in favor of the much more threatening stone spheres. Just before they were going to impact the Grey Hunter, the cylinders detonated into a cacophony of sound, bright light, magical disturbances and aromatic smoke, all of it specifically optimized for Grey Hunter senses. Dazed and disoriented by the flashbang grenades, the Grey Hunter stumbled and stopped. Just for a moment. Simulacrum number 4 pulled the trigger. Another deafening blast sounded out, closely followed by 2 more. Simulacrum number 2 didn't fire, as he was positioned very inconveniently and there was a danger he could hit the egg sac if he fired. Of the 3 bullets, 1 missed the Grey Hunter completely. Simulacrum number 1 had apparently aimed his shot so poorly that not even the trajectory-correcting magics the original placed on the bullet could help. It didn't matter, though. Both he and number 3 had hit the Grey Hunter straight into its cephalothorax, the bullet successfully breaking through its carapace. It was a testament to the Grey Hunter's toughness that, mere moments following this, it shook off the stun effect and retreated at top speed, as if it hadn't just been shot twice in the head with high-caliber armor-piercing bullets. But it didn't matter. It was living on borrowed time. From the moment those bullets sank into its flesh, its fate was sealed. The bullets were filled with the distilled essence of the Crystal Ooze, a magical creature every bit as powerful as the Grey Hunter, whose touch turned all flesh into inert crystal. The crystallization bullets, as Zorian called them, were already turning the Grey Hunter's organs into lifeless crystal, and there was nothing the spider could do about it. The Grey Hunter seemed to realize it too. It went berserk, lunging at Zack and Zorian with even greater zeal and then tried to flee. They couldn't allow that, of course. If it escaped, it would doubtlessly retreat into the deep dungeon and hide before dying, and other denizens of the dungeon might eat the egg sac before they could track down its corpse. Thus, walls of stone and force sprang up to bar its path, ectoplasmic threads and tentacles sought to entangle it, and dimensional gates barred the path to its lair. Eventually, the internal crystallization process advanced too far for the Grey Hunter to keep functioning, and it started to visibly slow and then stop. Simulacrum number 4 and his fellow duplicates were then sent in to hack it apart and claim the egg sac, because the original was too much of a coward to do it himself. Then again, the Grey Hunter did mangle one of the simulacrums beyond repair as its last act before dying, so maybe he shouldn't judge. But anyway, the Grey Hunter was dead, and the egg sac was still intact. It was time to visit Silver Lake again. After some thought, Simulacrum number 4 wandered off from the Grey Hunter's corpse and sought out the original to talk to him about visiting the old witch. He was so looking forward to seeing her reaction when she realized what they had done, and it wasn't fair that he wouldn't get to see it just because he was a simulacrum. He was the one that shot the Grey Hunter. Well, he and number 3, but number 3 ended up being killed by the Grey Hunter's last hurrah. He totally earned this and was not taking no for an answer. Break. After securing the corpse of the Grey Hunter, Zorian and his simulacrums went about carefully removing the egg sac attached to its underbelly without damaging it, a task far harder than Zorian would initially have assumed it would be. Then again, the egg sac had stayed attached to the Grey Hunter while it was doing all sorts of sharp movements and acrobatics, so it was a bit silly of him to assume he could just peel it off the spider as he wished. Still, it was nothing that Zorian and his duplicates couldn't solve with a bit of time and analysis. After an hour or so, they finally managed to separate the egg sac from the corpse without ruining it. They immediately set off to see Silver Lake. They had no idea what it took to keep the eggs alive in the long term after all, so it was better to deliver them to Silver Lake as soon as possible. They also kept the Grey Hunter's corpse, stashing it in the orb of the first Emperor. Much of its value was ruined when its insides crystallized, but there should still be enough of it for a potion or two. After some reasoned and totally calm discussion, Zorian also decided to take Simulacrum number 4 with him to see Silver Lake. Being accompanied by a simulacrum might help him convince her that he wasn't just a precocious teenage mage and that she should actually take him seriously. In any case, tracking down Silver Lake's home wasn't hard this time around. She may have hidden it in a pocket dimension, but Zorian knew the general area it was in and had specialized divinations that could find such things. They didn't try to break into the pocket dimension though. That would have been threatening and rude. Instead, they got her attention in a more civilized manner, by taking the Grey Hunter's corpse out of the orb and parading it around the pocket dimension entrance while chanting her name. It didn't take long before she decided to come out to meet them. She gave the dead Grey Hunter a quick, intrigued look before seemingly ignoring it in favor of focusing on them instead. She remained standing next to the entrance to her pocket dimension, though a long iron rod clutched tightly in her bony fingers. "Hello," Zack said, giving her a sunny smile and a casual wave of his hand. "What a curious bunch of visitors you are," Silver Lake said, unmoved by his friendliness. "It's not every day that two baby mages manage to track me down to this place. And is that a simulacrum attached to a golem frame? Aren't you a clever sort?" "Well, you're a pretty clever sort yourself," Zorian noted. "You figured out what my simulacrum is without casting any obvious analysis spells." He really meant that too. Certainly he couldn't pull off something like that. He'd have to spend several minutes casting analytical divinations before he could work out what he was dealing with. Granted, she may have done that before she stepped out of her pocket dimension, but it was still impressive. "Well, out with it," Silver Lake demanded. "Why are you bothering this old woman in the middle of her afternoon nap, making all this racket?" "We have come to trade," Zack said in an equally cheery tone, undaunted by her wariness. "We have killed the Grey Hunter and retrieved its eggs fully intact," Zorian said without preamble, waving his hand at the corpse of the giant spider on the ground next to them. His simulacrum, meanwhile, casually extracted the Grey Hunter's eggs from the box he was carrying, letting Silver Lake see them. Her eyes immediately lit up with greed and excitement. She hid it quite quickly, but it was there. "We thought you might be interested in them." "Oh. And why did you think that?" Silver Lake asked him, inclining her head to the side, like a bird that spotted something interesting. "Because you told me so in the past," Zorian said blandly. "Because I told you so in the past," Silver Lake repeated slowly, looking at him like he was stupid. "What a curious thing to say. Old I may be, but my memory is still going strong, and I don't remember ever talking to you." Zack and Zorian had discussed extensively what to tell Silver Lake before coming to this place. Telling her the truth about the time loop was dangerous, because she was likely proficient in both soul and mind magic. She was a highly capable witch after all, and they were famous for dabbling in both of those fields. However, convincing her to help them through lies and manipulations would take a long time, and time was, amusingly enough, something they had a chronic shortage of. Thus, they had unanimously decided to just tell the annoying old witch the truth and see how she reacted. Even if she was hostile, they could probably handle it. Probably. "You don't remember because the world we live in is constantly repeating itself. On the night of the summer festival, the world ends. Everything reverts to how it was the month before and then carries on as if nothing was wrong. Like an endlessly repeating music box, you repeat your actions over and over in month-long intervals, constantly forgetting, constantly starting over," Zorian explained, being deliberately a little melodramatic and mysterious. Silver Lake listened to his explanation with an arched eyebrow, looking surprised and amused in equal measure. "My word, you came all this way just to deliver this kind of tall tale to me?" Silver Lake said, chuckling lightly. I suppose I can understand where you're coming from. I have been told on occasion that I am rather repetitive in my arguments. It's not just you, Sorian said, shaking his head. Everyone is reliving this month over and over. Only me and Zack here are immune. Oh, but of course. Silver Lake said, slapping herself in the forehead. Of course it's like that. No doubt I too can get this kind of immunity at very favorable prices, thus saving myself from this awful, awful fate of repeating myself for all eternity. I must say the scammers these days are getting really inventive. Actually, there is nothing we can do to help you retain awareness of previous restarts, Zack said, clacking his tongue unhappily. Kind of depressing, but there you go. We're not here for that. As I have noted earlier, we're here to trade the Grey Hunter's eggs in exchange for magical help. Silver Lake stayed silent for a second. Ah, I see, she finally said. This is just you answering my question. I asked how you knew I needed the Grey Hunter's eggs and you gave me an answer. I supposed if I asked you for an actual explanation? This is an actual explanation, Sorian said. It's not my fault you don't believe me. Humph, Silver Lake scoffed. Out of curiosity, during this conversation that I have no memory of, did I ever actually tell you what I needed the Grey Hunter's eggs for? No, you did not, Sorian admitted. To be honest, I was rather angry with you back then and didn't inquire too deeply. I came to you for help with a pressing problem and you sent me on all sorts of tasks, all of which I did without complaint. But my only reward was to be told to go after the Grey Hunter for its eggs. I was a lot weaker back then, so that basically amounted to sending me on an impossible task in order to get rid of me. That does sound like something I would do, Silver Lake nodded sagely. Which brings me to my next point. Why are you so certain that I actually desire these eggs? Maybe I just sent you on a fool's errand to waste your time, and didn't actually care about the outcome. Well, the truth was that Sorian didn't know this for certain. He was making an educated guess, based on things like her clearly having tried to acquire the eggs herself in the past. But she didn't have to know that. I'm an empath, he told her. So I am certain you do want these eggs very, very much. Silver Lake scowled at him. A mind mage, she spat out in disgust. I have the most rotten luck, I swear. I only like mind magic when I'm the one using it on others. Fine, I admit it, I do want the Grey Hunter's eggs. But they're not as valuable as you might hope. Meaning? Sorian asked calmly. I have an important project that requires them, but it's only one of the two critical components that I lack. If you had brought both of them, I would really be desperate to make a deal with you. But it's a shame, for without the other critical component, the eggs are merely interesting. Zack rolled his eyes at her. You're just like Sorian described you, he said. Every time one of your tasks is accomplished, you come up with another one. Well, that's not very fair, she said reasonably. I don't remember ever giving you a task after all. But that aside, I never said I will not trade for the eggs. I just said you better not hope to swindle something actually good from me in exchange for something that minor. Minor, she says. Right. Out of curiosity, what is this other critical component? Sorian asked. Bones and certain organs of a giant brown salamander that has grown past a certain size, Silver Lake said. That's it. Zack asked incredulously. Those things are everywhere around here. It's not as simple as it sounds, Silver Lake said. Yes, there are plenty of them to be found in the rivers and creeks around us, but they simply aren't big enough, not mature enough. Giant brown salamanders never die of old age, you see. They simply get bigger. But they are a fairly weak type of magical creature and they grow really slowly past a certain point, so almost none of them reach the size I need them to be. I need a salamander that has survived for at least 100 years, and that's incredibly rare. They can't be bred in captivity? Zack asked. Silver Lake looked at him like he just asked the dumbest thing ever. Who would be willing to wait 100 years for a creature to grow up? She asked. Nobody has that much time, boy. Besides, they'd probably all get sick and die before the 100 years are up. I have no idea how to go about raising giant salamanders. Sorian couldn't help but remember how his first meeting with Silver Lake had gone. If he remembered correctly, he had just been attacked by a particularly large giant brown salamander and had killed it in self-defense. This was the catalyst that had caused Silver Lake to finally reveal herself to him. Back then he had blithely given her the salamander corpse, not even realizing how valuable it was. And Silver Lake, after receiving something so apparently valuable from him, still decided to send him on a bunch of fool's errands without even hearing him out. That withered old bitch. Let's stop dancing around the issue for a moment, Zorian said, swallowing down his annoyance in favor of actually accomplishing something. This is our offer. The Grey Hunter's egg sac in exchange for a month's worth of instruction in pocket dimension creation. What do you say? Oh, pocket dimension creation. Silverlake said contemplatively, tapping her chin with her index finger. So that's what you're after. That's a pretty exotic and high-level skill. Are you sure you're even capable of learning it? Oh good. She didn't deny she possessed the skill in question. Zorian had kind of been afraid that her hideout was just something she had found through luck and that she wasn't actually capable of creating pocket dimensions herself. It would have been a pain trying to find someone else who had that kind of expertise. In any case, Zorian didn't try to convince Silverlake with words. Instead, he simply opened a dimensional gateway straight to Koth right then and there. Silverlake was instantly on guard when he started casting a spell, but didn't try to stop him. About halfway through, she seemed to realize what he was doing and relaxed. Instead, she got an intrigued look on her face, especially when the dimensional passage itself sprang into existence beside Zorian. She circled the gate a few times, peering intently at it before turning to Zorian again. Well, you are full of surprises. I don't think I've ever seen such a stable, well-crafted dimensional passage, Silverlake reluctantly admitted. Zorian smiled. That was only natural. After all, Zorian's gate creation skills were a fusion of more orthodox gate creation skills that Svim had taught him, as well as the insights Zorian had made from studying the Abasin permanent gates and seeing the Bakura gates in action. He doubted many people had had the opportunity to study so many different gate creation methods. As you can see, I'm quite good at dimensionalism, Zorian said. And so is my friend Zack here. You don't have to worry about us not being able to follow your instructions. Well, that's good, Silverlake said with a wide, happy grin. Then that just leaves the question of payment. I don't think the Grey Hunter's eggs will be enough to pay for this. Zorian didn't bat an eye at this. He'd fully expected Silverlake to discard their initial offer and reach out for more. Someone as greedy and insatiable as she was would never agree to a person's first offer. It was good then that he had many more things to offer. I could dispute that, but I am feeling generous today, said Zorian. He motioned for Zack to take out the orb of the first emperor, which he promptly did. What my friend is holding is a portable pocket dimension holding an ancient ruin. It's a lost artifact from the Age of Gods, probably impossible to reproduce in modern times. If you agree to this deal, we will allow you to study the artifact for the duration of our lessons. I'm sure you can imagine how beneficial this could be for your own pocket dimension creation skills. Silverlake clearly could imagine, because she stared at the orb with such intensity that Zorian was afraid she would attack them both on the spot and try to take it from them. But after a few seconds she shook her head and tore her eyes away from the orb. Throw in that modified gate spell of yours and we have a deal, Silverlake said. No, I can't agree to that, said Zorian with fake sadness. Still, that spell isn't completely out of the question, if you agree to some additional concessions. Silverlake scowled at him, but Zorian completely ignored her displeasure. She could be greedy, so could he. He could tell she really wanted that gate spell, so why not get everything he could out of it? I suppose you have something specific in mind? She asked him. I want to acquire the ability of soul perception, Zorian said. And unfortunately, the potion made out of dirge moth chrysalises is not an option. Yes, that potion doesn't keep well at all, Silverlake confirmed. It can last 6 months at most, and even that's pushing it. But really, why are you bothering me with such a minor request? Just go kill some people. That's how nearly all necromancers get that ability these days. Even if you have no talent whatsoever at soul magic, you should be able to get it after 20 or so sacrifices. That isn't an option, Zorian said, glaring at her lightly. Oh, if I have to ritually murder people to get the ability, I'd rather give up on the idea. Bah, Silverlake spat. What's a touchy-feely, squeamish kid like you trying to get soul perception for it then? You'll never achieve anything worth a damn in soul magic with that attitude. I may need it to save my life, Zorian told her. It's not something you need to worry about. The question is, can you do it? Can you make me a potion that can grant me soul perception in less than a month's time? Humph, Silverlake scoffed. Do you even know how difficult it is to acquire soul perception through a mere potion? Yes, Zorian said decisively. I really do. That's why I came to you for help. Truthfully, most of what Zorian knew about that came from Sudamir, who had been extensively interrogated for his knowledge in previous restarts. Alanik contributed some, but the scarred battle priest was cagey about his knowledge of necromancy and outright admitted to be inferior to Sudamir in that regard. Anyway, apparently all souls had some measure of soul perception in them by default, but it was tightly locked and unavailable for use. Alanik's explanation for this was that soul perception was something the gods intended to be only activated after death, to help guide the soul to its destination, and that its premature activation on the material plane was dangerously tempting. Thus, the gods sealed it away until death, lest it lead people to heresy and sin. Sudamir's explanation was that this ability was something inherent to souls themselves, and that the gods had selfishly sealed it away because they were afraid of humanity's power and ingenuity. Considering necromancers tended to be wildly immoral, Zorian was kind of leaning towards Alanik's side of the argument. It didn't matter though. Even Alanik admitted that soul perception wasn't evil by itself. The Triumvirate Church urged people not to deliberately seek it out, but at the same time they encouraged its use among their priesthood. Every high-ranking priest and quite a few lower-ranking ones had some measure of soul perception. With the disappearance of the gods, the Triumvirate Church had to find a way to make up for their loss of divinely granted powers, and granting soul perception abilities to their priesthood on a mass scale was one of the methods used. It was the Triumvirate Church who developed and perfected the Dirge Moth potion, the most affordable and reliable alchemical method of gaining soul perception to date. It was just that the recipe for the potion was so simple and distributed so widely that it eventually leaked outside the church hierarchy and became wildly employed in necromantic circles. Zorian once felt it was strange that a potion only available in 23-year intervals would be so attractive to people. But then he found a fragmentary recipe for an alternative potion in Sudamir's memories and immediately realized why. The ingredients required absolutely couldn't be acquired either in stores or on the black market. These were the sort of things one needed to personally seek out in the wild and dangerous corners of the world, and most of the ingredients came attached to creatures possessing some method of attacking the soul. Even for Zack and Zorian, those things were a major danger. In order to make a potion outlined in Sudamir's memories, one would have to possess top-notch connections or a great deal of time to track down all the ingredients, have enough power to claim them, and then find someone with enough alchemical skill to make a complicated potion they had probably never made in their life and succeed on their first try. On top of that, all such potions were based on the same basic principle. They brought the imbiber on the very brink of death, only to pull them back at the very last moment. Very much like that special training Alanik had put him through, only even more extreme. Needless to say, if you made that kind of potion incorrectly, you were highly likely to die on the spot after drinking it. Dirge moths may only come every 23 years, but they were rather abundant when they did show up, thus allowing alchemists to actually practice with the ingredients. Of course, there were other methods of getting soul perception. They just weren't very useful for him. For instance, one could simply be born with it. Some people had innate soul sight called ghost eyes by the scholars, much like he had been born innately empathic and capable of instinctive mind magic. He obviously wasn't one of these. Some people, after almost dying, unlocked the ability by accident. But this was something that couldn't be counted on since nobody knew how that really worked. Finally, there was a really simple, accessible method involving a sacrificial ritual. All one needed to do was forge a temporary soul bond with a person and then kill them, fully, while keeping them conscious because of course it wouldn't work otherwise. This was the method Sudamir used and the method that most budding necromancers used since it was cheap and easy to set up. Having experienced what the procedure entailed from Sudamir's memories, Zorian knew he didn't have what it took to go through that. He was, as Silver Lake said, way too squeamish to basically torture a dozen people to death. If you know how difficult those potions are, then surely you understand that making one of those in a month is nonsense even for me. Just gathering the ingredients alone. Whatever ingredients you need we will procure for you, said Zack, cutting her off. You only need to put them together into something that works. Silver Lake said, humming to herself thoughtfully. You did kill the Grey Hunter while not damaging its egg sac in the slightest. That speaks well of your combat skills. Still, gathering ingredients for an old-fashioned soul perception potion will require you to have at least elementary soul defenses. We have those, Zack told her. You do? She asked, sounding surprised. Well, fine then. So long as you take care of ingredient collection, I guess I can make you a potion of soul perception. But only that. I will not give you the recipe or allow you to watch the creation process itself. Acceptable, Zorian nodded. He waited for a few seconds, but it did not seem like she would say anything else. So, do we have a deal then? In exchange for the Grey Hunter's eggs, research access to the portable pocket dimension in our possession and my expertise with the gate spell, you agree to teach us pocket dimension creation and make us a potion of soul perception. Silverlake stood silently, mulling the deal in her head. She frowned and grimaced to herself, occasionally breaking into indecipherable muttering and strange gestures. Zorian watched her suspiciously, worried that she was trying to slip in some stealthy spellcasting and all that nonsense, but it all seemed to be completely innocuous. Well, as innocuous as that kind of unstable behavior could be, anyway. I have a question, she finally said. Zorian motioned her to continue. Earlier you told me that wild story about this month endlessly repeating itself and how I lose all memory of it while you don't. Wouldn't that mean that everything I gain in this deal is illusionary, while everything you gain from it will actually stay with you? I thought you didn't believe in that, Zorian remarked. Let's pretend I do for a moment, Silverlake said without batting an eye. Am I wrong? You're not wrong, Zorian shook his head. In the grand scheme of things, this deal heavily favors us. Everything you gain will be gone at the end of this month, while the knowledge we gain and the unlocking of my soul perception will stay with us for future use. Then, don't you think it's stupid to tell me that? Silverlake asked him curiously. She didn't seem to be actually angry, merely interested in the logic he used to arrive to his decision. I mean, I don't actually believe that nonsense you're spouting, but if I did, it would make me totally unwilling to accept this deal of yours. I'm thinking towards the future, Zorian told her calmly. It's not possible for me to absorb your pocket dimension creation skills in less than a month. We both know this. I will be coming over here with this same deal again and again, and I'll need to continue from where we left off in the previous restart. I might be able to fool you at first with lies of having learned the basics from someone else, but that will quickly get untenable. At some point I will have to explain how I know skills that are obviously yours, even though you don't remember teaching me. Well, that's all good, but how does this help you right now? Silverlake asked expectantly. Right now would be a good time to discover something I can use to convince the future you I am telling the truth, Zorian said. You might not believe me exactly, but you're clearly willing to entertain the idea for a time, as your current line of questioning amply proves. She scowled at him, but he ignored her displeasure. Basically, I am hoping you will eventually tell me something that I can show off to your future self in order to convince her that the time loop is real and we really have met before, even if she has no memory of it. Silverlake stared at him for a moment before breaking into cackling laughter. Zorian sighed. He really didn't see what was so funny about that. Boy, you are madder than I am. She finally wheezed out, punching herself in the chest a couple of times to get her laughing under control. Anyway, I accept your deal. And since I'm in a good mood right now, I'll throw in a reward for you. You want a secret? I'll give you a good one. The reason I need those Grey Hunter's eggs and the body of a 100-year-old giant salamander is because I'm working on a potion of youth. You're trying to stave off death from old age? Zack asked, surprised. Wow. That's an incredibly advanced skill. I heard from Zorian you were a master alchemist, but I didn't know you were that good. Silly boy, Silverlake chuckled. I'm not trying to stave off old age. I already have that. They were both struck speechless at the admission. An immortal? Ha ha. Silverlake cackled. Surprised, aren't you? Yes, I could persist like this indefinitely. Don't get fooled by my dashing good looks. I'm positively ancient. How ancient? Zack asked cautiously. It's impolite to inquire about a lady's age, she said with mock bashfulness. But it's a 3-digit number, I can tell you that much. Anyway, I did a fine job of stopping time from ravaging my body, but this isn't good enough for me. I want my youth back. And with those spider eggs you brought me, I'm only one step away from that goal. A short silence descended on the scene, Zack and Zorian being at a loss what to say about that. Pretty good secret, isn't it? Silverlake said. She told them all this just so she could brag about how amazing she was, didn't she? Yes, Zorian coughed. Yes, it is. Anyway, about this trade. Come back here 2 days from now, Silver Lake said dismissively. You came here completely unannounced, so you've caught me completely unprepared. My house is a total mess right now, completely unsuitable for entertaining guests. I need to get some extra chairs out of the basement, dust off the furniture and maybe prepare some refreshments. I think I still have some of that mushroom cake I experimented with a few years back. I know that sounds a little dodgy, but it keeps really well and it gives you such wonderful dreams. The eggs stay with us until we meet again then, Zorian warned her, completely ignoring her banter. Humph, Silver Lake scoffed. Fine, be that way. Paranoid brats. Make sure to stash them in a dry, dark place with plenty of ambient mana around or they'll get ruined and the deal will be off. I'll keep that in mind, Zorian nodded. The eggs were a lot simpler to preserve than he feared then. Just to make sure this thing is safe, right? The eggs won't hatch in a few hours and release a bunch of tough little spider monsters everywhere, right? No. Well, they shouldn't, Silver Lake said, hesitating slightly. We're stashing them well away from any populated areas, Zack said decisively. And when we go to retrieve it, we're sending one of your simulacrums in first. Hey, the simulacrum currently present protested. Stop that, Silver Lake snapped at them. It will be fine. Trust me. All three of them gave Silver Lake an unamused look, clearly telling her how they felt about her reliability and trustworthiness. Kids these days no respect for their elders, she muttered angrily. Well, off with you then. Go away. This has been such a pleasant meeting thus far, it's best to end things on a high note. Don't forget to bring gifts the next time we meet. Honestly, I can't believe you two came to visit someone and didn't even bring them a bottle of brandy or something. Don't you know that gift-giving is an important tradition? No, don't answer that, I was just lecturing you, not actually asking you for your opinion. Go. Shoo. And thus their meeting with Silver Lake ended, with her shooing them away like a bunch of naughty cats loitering around her backyard. Still, they'd largely achieved what they came for, so Zorian was happy. He just hoped she was actually going to keep to her end of the bargain. When Zack and Zorian came to visit Silver Lake again, she was standing next to a humble cottage, messily butchering a pair of giant brown salamanders. These were smaller specimens, incomparable to the giant that had tried to eat Zorian so long ago, so Zorian assumed they were not the sort she needed to complete her potion of youth. But apparently she still had some use for even younger salamanders. In any case, she welcomed them with a wide smile and an immediate demand to hand over the spider eggs. They did so, patiently waiting as she ignored them entirely for over a minute in favor of inspecting the eggs for damage and whatever else she was looking for. She ushered them into her cottage, which proved to be less of an actual cottage and more of a disguise for the entrance to her pocket dimension. Well, the inner layer of her pocket dimension. The cottage itself was also hidden in its own pocket dimension, which is why Zorian couldn't find it by just wandering the forest. But the cottage dimension was just the outer layer of her hidden world, one that could be deployed, thereby becoming actually accessible to visitors, and compressed, seemingly disappearing from the world entirely, on a whim. Nested inside this cottage dimension was another, bigger pocket dimension, which served as Silver Lake's actual home and base of operations. In Silver Lake's own words, the cottage was just a front to fool idiot visitors. As for the contents of the inner layer, it consisted of three things: a nice, luxurious two-story house, an expansive herb garden full of rare magical plants, and a heavily warded alchemical workshop where she did most of her work. Yes, a powerful witch that was clearly very proud of her traditions and made distinctions between alchemy and potion making, had a fully equipped alchemical workshop that would be familiar to any conventional alchemist out in the major cities. Zorian couldn't help but find that a little amusing. It had been 5 days since then, and thus far Silver Lake was keeping to her side of the deal. Zorian was afraid she would try to shirk her duties as an instructor, giving them inscrutable training regimens that weren't certain to work before disappearing into her workshop for the rest of the day, but this didn't happen. Probably because they were deep inside her home base and there was a real danger that they could torch her home and herb garden if they felt cheated by her. Or maybe because she really wanted the gate spell modifications and knew that the level of cooperation she could expect out of Zack and Zorian in regards to that would directly correlate to the level of dedication she showed when teaching them how to make pocket dimensions. Whatever her reasons, Silver Lake actually gave them long, exhaustive explanations and even created a few fist-sized pocket spaces in front of them as a demonstration. Creating a pocket dimension was deceptively simple. The basic idea was to stretch and fold a chosen volume of space into a miniature spatial bottle and sort of cap it. This cap was called the anchor point, and it prevented the folded space from snapping back into its natural form the moment it was no longer being forced into shape, as space was naturally wont to do. After that, the pocket dimension could be gradually inflated to the maximum size the anchor point could bear. Obviously, the creation of an anchor point was the most important part of pocket dimension creation. It was the place where the dimension was connected to the main reality, and served as both an entrance and as a foundation upon which the stability of the dimension ultimately rested. Its size, power, and sophistication determined how big and stable a pocket dimension could be. If it was ever destroyed, the dimension attached to it would quickly meet the same fate. Neither Zack nor Zorian had yet managed to successfully create a stable anchor point, no matter how minor. The process was every bit as hard as learning how to cast the gate spell, except it required even more mana and attention to detail. Zorian was somewhat annoyed to realize that Zack would probably get the grasp of the ability far sooner than he would, simply because he had far more mana to burn on training than Zorian did. It didn't help that Zorian had heavily stunted his ability to recover mana by maintaining 6 different simulacrums. Funny how he invented a brand new method of using simulacrums, having the maintenance cost of each one, and then promptly doubled the amount of simulacrums he kept going at any particular time. Currently, Zorian was sitting on the ground in Silver Lake's pocket dimension, reviewing reports from his simulacrums while he waited for his mana reserves to recover. One of the simulacrums was in Koth, brainstorming how to get to the other pieces of the key with Daimen. Another was raiding the Academy Library for restricted theory books on advanced dimensionalism. The third one was arranging a trade deal with one of the minor experts they were approaching for work. The fourth and fifth ones were working on upgrades to the simulacrum's golem frames. Not quite something he'd invest so heavily in normally, but he had little choice. All simulacrums went on a strike until he agreed to permanently station 2 of the copies on that particular task. Finally, the 6th and last simulacrum was working on something very delicate and possibly dangerous: mental enhancements. It was pretty low-key for now. He didn't want an insane copy of him rampaging around, or worse, going after him. Additionally, the simulacrums were still essentially him, which meant they were not at all okay with thoughtlessly risking their minds. Taking into account the possible risks to his own safety, and the disturbing possibility that his own simulacrums might mutiny if he pushed things too far in this direction, Zorian had ordered the last simulacrum to limit himself to self-inflicted illusions for now. Things like figuring out how to block out noise and other distractions, add highlights and reminders to his perception, and so on. It was a very orthodox, very safe subfield of mental enhancements. Because it only modified the caster's senses, not their thoughts and emotions, there was only so much one could mess up, and little of it was unfixable. Human mages had done quite a lot of work in this regard, mostly because they had been trying to make divinations that could display their output though illusions projected on the caster's senses. Of course, Zorian also consulted the various Iranian webs too. The Luminous Advocates and Perfect Phantasm Crafters were the 2 webs most helpful to this project, though he had also received notable help from several otherwise minor webs such as Band of Fog and Dreaming Refuge. "Boy, I told you to keep an eye on that cauldron," Silver Lake snapped at him, breaking him out of his thoughts. "It's going to boil over if you keep daydreaming like that. Quit it. It's unprofessional." "Ugh," Zorian grunted unhappily, throwing a glance at the huge iron cauldron to his left. Silver Lake did basically rope him into helping her with her potion making, while he recovered. However, it was only supposed to be for 10 minutes and she had only come back now to take over, after at least half an hour had passed. "We never agreed I would be your personal assistant when we made the trade. I should start charging you for these things," Zorian muttered, just loud enough for her to hear him. She pretended he didn't say anything. He raised his voice at her. "What is that cauldron even doing? If you're going to recruit me in your projects, you should at least tell me what's going on." "It's an experiment," Silver Lake said distractedly, too busy cleaning some kind of carrot-like wild root to look him in the eye while speaking. "I'm sure you noticed me chopping up those runty salamanders in the last few days. I'm trying to artificially concentrate the salamander's regenerative essence to see if I can create a workable substitute for the 100-year-old salamander that I lack. Probably won't work, but it's worth a try." "Regenerative essence?" Zorian said, frowning. "Is that what the giant salamander is for?" "Of course," Silver Lake said. They can regrow anything, repair any damage. If you carve them carefully enough, both halves will regrow into fully healthy, functional copies. Useful thing that most healing magic simply enhances and accelerates the body's natural healing abilities, so it doesn't work well on some wounds. The salamander's regenerative essence, if concentrated enough and combined with some other ingredients, why, it might even turn back the clock and undo the effect of old age. Saurian hummed thoughtfully. Okay, so this was slightly more interesting than he assumed. So why are you doing it like this, doing the procedure under the open sky in a simple iron cauldron? You have an alchemy workshop that nearly every professional alchemist would be envious of. Why not use it? Shows what you know, Silverlake said. I'm doing it this way because this is the superior option. It's good enough for the job. Doing this with a complicated alchemical setup wouldn't get stuff done any faster or give better results. It would just inflict wear and tear on delicate equipment and be a nightmare to clean up afterwards. Saurian had nothing to say to that. Her argument did make a lot of sense after all. They both stayed silent for a while. Eventually Silverlake finally finished preparing the wild roots and unceremoniously dumped them into the boiling cauldron. She watched the liquid bubble for a few seconds, before nodding sagely to herself and adding a couple of wooden planks to the fire. Do you know what the difference between alchemy and potion making is, boy? Silverlake asked suddenly, glancing at him with narrowed eyes. Saurian was tempted to tell her that potion making was just a subset of alchemy, but he knew she would consider that a wrong answer. She was asking about potion making in the sense that ancient witches understood it, not in the sense that was currently taught in schools. Potion making focuses on using a cauldron and nothing else to make their wares, Saurian said. Yes, Silverlake agreed. Sounds very foolish, doesn't it? A botched potion can release clouds of poisonous or mutagenic gas, explode in your face or splash all over you and melt your skin. Hell, a correctly made potion can be just as bad. Very often, old witches carried a mark of their minor failures in the form of scars, strange odors and skin diseases from the years of exposure to magical fumes and concoctions. Modern alchemy is so much safer, so much more precise. Why then do you think the old witches do things in the way they did? Saurian cocked his head to the side, trying to figure out what she was getting at. What's that got to do with anything? Because it was cheaper? He tried. Close, Silverlake said. It's because alchemy in its current form requires an entire society built to enable it. Somebody has to build all the vials, containers, heaters, and other equipment. Somebody needs to grow, gather, and track down the ingredients used in it. Somebody needs to transport and distribute it to those that need it, or have the right connections to use it. Somebody needs to guard the workshops full of valuable equipment from thieves and various miscreants. The old witches had access to none of that, so they had to make do with chucking things into a big iron cauldron and eyeballing things. It is, as you said, cheaper. Cheaper in terms of money and also cheaper in terms of social infrastructure needed to support it. I see, Saurian said after a while. These days there are virtually no witches that do not use alchemy in some form, in addition to their traditional cauldron-based skills, Silverlake continued. The ancient covens would have considered us all heretics, I bet. But the ancient covens have all died out to my knowledge, and that's hardly an accident. Times change. The covens didn't and paid the price for it. Alchemy has its place, as does potion making. Don't be so quick to look down on it. You made that entire long-winded speech just to deliver that little lecture at the end of it, didn't you? Saurian huffed in annoyance. You're going to remember it better this way, Silverlake cackled. She prodded the bubbling liquid in the cauldron with an iron ladle she used to mix it. Well, whatever, I think we can leave this be for a few hours. You recovered yet, boy? I say, you sure take your time with your rest. It's a miracle you got this far with such an awful work ethic. Why, when I was your age Saurian sighed and got up, doing his best to drown out her moralizing. He sent a quick message through his soul to the simulacrum working on implementing sensory filters, telling it to work quickly. He was going to need those skills as soon as possible. Chapter 075. Soul Stealer. The great wilderness that existed in the north of Altazia was a place that contained many rare and valuable things. Exotic natural resources, interesting locations, magical plants and animals extinct in the south. All of those and more could be located if one was willing to spend time searching for them and was strong enough to survive deep in the untamed mountains and forests. This wasn't because the northern wilderness was particularly blessed in natural resources and magical hotspots, of course, but simply because most of it had never been settled and systematically exploited by human societies. The southern areas had once had these kinds of things as well, but the spread of civilization and rising number of mages had caused many of them to disappear. Mines were depleted, forests chopped down and turned into farmlands, dungeon openings sealed away or turned into carefully regulated mana wells, delicate areas destroyed through war or short-term greed, and dangerous plants and animals deliberately hunted to extinction. After all, nobody wanted to live next to a man-eating magical tiger or a walking tree that periodically planted itself in your field and ruined the crops, no matter how valuable they were to some mage in the neighboring country. Such was the case with the plant that Zack and Zorian were currently after. The Soul Sizer chrysanthemum, as it was called, was one of the rare entities that ate souls. Since nobody wanted a soul-eating flower growing in their garden, or anywhere near them really, the plant rapidly went extinct anytime humans moved into an area. Thus, if Zack and Zorian wanted to find one, they had to go to the wild areas untouched by most of humanity. Currently, the two of them were hiding under a globe of invisibility, warily watching a huge black bear amble past them. Though the bear wasn't truly a life-threatening danger to them, they were in no mood to pick a fight with it. It was a resilient monster, and no part of its body was particularly valuable on the general market. Considering they had been trudging through the dense foliage of the great northern forest for most of the day, they really just wanted to find where the Soul Sizer chrysanthemum was hiding and go home. Thankfully, the bear did not appear to be hunting and paid little attention to its surroundings. It simply walked past them and soon disappeared from sight. Zack dispelled the globe of invisibility that hid them from sight and then cautiously scanned the area for further dangers. Although not as dangerous as the deeper layers of the dungeon and the like, Altasia's northern forests were not a place for the unwary. This deep in the wilderness, there lurked threats that posed a danger even to Zack and Zorian working together, should they be caught by surprise. Gathering all these ingredients on Silver Lake's list is surprisingly hard, Zack said, relaxing slightly upon detecting nothing of note. They're rare, dangerous, or both, and Silver Lake never gave us a single clue where we could find any of them. And yet the task is still clearly doable, so we can't really complain about being given a completely impossible task. The old witch really has a knack for this stuff. I'm half convinced that most of these are not necessary for the potion at all, Zorian said, sighing lightly. He spent a few seconds reorienting himself and then set off in the northwestern direction. Zack followed him without complaint. She probably added quite a few of these because she personally needs them for something, not because the potion we ordered demands it. The trouble is, we have no idea which ingredients are essential and which are not, Zack finished for him. She never lets us see the actual recipe. We can only speculate and try to call her bluff, but we're more pressed for time than she is, and she knows it. She wouldn't relent even if we guessed correctly and might even up the price out of spite. Yes, Zorian nodded. Whatever. It's doable, that's all that matters. Let her have her little victory if it pleases her. True, Zack agreed. Say, are you really sure we're in the right place? We've been looking for more than 2 hours and the flower doesn't appear to be here. Maybe the Yeti tribe we spoke to lied to us. Relations between them and humans are not exactly the best. The tribe's shaman didn't lie, Zorian said, shaking his head. He thinks we're cocky idiots that will get our souls eaten by the Soul Sizer chrysanthemum, so he told us the truth as he saw it. He gets the payment we promised him and 2 humans end up dead. It's a win-win as far as he was concerned. It's just that Yetis don't really have any concept of maps or precise coordinates, so all I have is a set of vague directions regarding the local landmarks. Just be a little patient. But this is so boring, Zack whined childishly. Tough luck, Zorian told him pitilessly. Zack was quiet for a few seconds before he started talking again. You know, the idea of fighting a flower is kind of funny. And embarrassing, he said. I don't know, Zorian said. I think fighting those rabbits a few days back was way more embarrassing. Especially since both of us ended up getting bitten before we managed to bring them down. Ugh. Don't remind me, Zack groused. Those have got to be one of those fake ingredients Silver Lake added to the list. I mean, how are a bunch of rabbits like that related to a potion of soul perception? I think those red gems embedded in their foreheads were some kind of sensors, Zorian speculated. They did see through our every attempt to sneak up on them. The two of them spent the next half an hour discussing which of the ingredients were likely to be fake, only to realize that none of them were obvious imposters. They could all potentially be valid, which meant that either Zorian was too paranoid or Silver Lake was very clever when picking her additions. Zorian was leaning towards the second option. I know we already talked about this before visiting Silver Lake, but are you really sure this is even necessary? Zack eventually asked. Seeing Zorian's confused look, he moved to clarify. Acquiring soul sight, I mean. Are you really sure you need it? Of course I'm not sure, Zorian said, shaking his head. Maybe once we get the whole key, everything will be neatly resolved and me getting soul sight will end up being a pointless diversion. The thing is, even if the Guardian of the Threshold overlooks the fact there are two of us and places our souls back into our bodies, there is a problem. Your original body still has its old soul, Zack said. Well, it would be more accurate to say that the body I hope to inhabit was never truly mine to begin with, Zorian said. But yes, that's the core issue. If I want out, I need to steal my real-world body somehow. I guess this could be done by convincing the Guardian to switch my soul with that of the original, but the Guardian has made it clear that this goes against the very nature of his job. I'm skeptical that acquiring the key will let us ignore this. I get that, Zack said. But maybe you don't have to literally steal the body, you know? Maybe you can kind of, coexist with your old self. An interesting idea, Zorian said. I don't know enough about soul magic to say if that would be possible, but that kind of thing would still require me to acquire soul perception first. Yeah, I guess, Zack sighed. They walked through the forest in silence for a few seconds, Zorian keeping an eye out for that funny-shaped rock outcropping that the old Yeti had told him about. Should be around here. What's really on your mind? Zorian eventually asked. I'm not really sure that I'm the real controller of this time loop, Zack said. And if I'm not, I could be facing the same choice you are. Ah, Zorian said, nodding. Personally, he felt Zack's fears were unfounded, but he knew by now it was useless to tell him that. I see. Do you think I should try to acquire soul perception too? Zack asked. I'm not nearly as comfortable as you are in killing my old self, but I have to admit, if I have to choose between myself and him, it would be the safe thing to do, Zorian told him. Concerns about not being the true controller aside, he didn't see any particular downsides about Zack acquiring soul perception. But best not to try that in this particular restart. We have no idea how the safety triggers on your marker are going to react to a potion like that. I mean, they did terminate the restart when you tried to undergo Alanix training, remember? I remember, Zack scowled. If it weren't for that, I would have had simulacrums of my own by now. Right. They could easily trigger this time too, since the potion works on similar principles, Zorian remarked. It's best if we wait for a less interesting restart before testing this. Yeah, I'm in no hurry, Zack said. He glanced around the area they were traveling in. How long do you think it will take you to find this soul-eating flower? Maybe we should stop for now and come back tomorrow. Actually, Zorian began, his eyes zeroing in on a bunch of seemingly unremarkable trees. We're here. He pointed at the base of one of the trees, where a beautiful white flower proudly sprouted from the forest floor. There was nothing overtly supernatural or sinister about the soul-sizer chrysanthemum. It was a large plant but not monstrously huge. Its leaves and stalk were the most mundane of green, easily blending into the rest of the nearby vegetation. A single white flower the size of Zorian's head crowned the otherwise unremarkable plant, its numerous rows of petals folded inwards into a sort of flowery hemisphere. This sort of peaceful, unremarkable appearance was merely a trap, though. Since the soul-sizer chrysanthemum was immobile, most of the time it behaved as inconspicuously as possible to lure its victims near. The moment Zack or Zorian stepped close enough, the flower would reveal its true nature. You know how I said earlier that the idea of fighting a flower is kind of funny? Zack asked. Yeah. Zorian prompted. I take it back, Zack said. There is nothing funny about a dangerous creature that hides itself so thoroughly. I looked straight at it and I still can't see any sign of danger. If we hadn't been clued in advance about its true nature and where exactly it can be found, we'd never have noticed it. Zorian hummed in agreement. If you really think about it, this is one of the most dangerous enemies we could possibly face. Stuff like the Grey Hunter could kill us, but the time loop makes that just an inconvenience. But this flower? If we stumbled upon it by accident without being mentally ready or applying some kind of soul ward beforehand, there is a good chance we'd really end up with our souls devoured by it. Well, you would, Zack pointed out cheekily. The safeguards on my marker would probably kick in the moment my soul was torn away from my body. You, on the other hand, would be thoroughly doomed. You know what soul-devouring entities do, right? They flay the outer layers of the soul for nourishment and keep the indestructible core as a sort of mana battery, Saurian said. Or in the case of wraiths, they use the core to make more of their kind. I don't know how fast this process is, but even if it takes a while, I'd probably end up with my soul severely damaged by the time the restart ended. I would probably spend every single restart thereafter in a deep coma and stay that way until the time loop collapsed. They both stared at the seemingly peaceful flower for about a minute, both of them lost in their own thoughts. All right, enough dawdling, Zack suddenly said, clapping his hands loudly to wake up Saurian from his reverie. Let's get this thing uprooted and chopped up into ingredients. After discussing it for a few minutes, they decided it would be best if only one of them confronted the chrysanthemum. The other would stay back and be ready to extract them if something went wrong. This, however, led to the issue of who would be staying back and who should advance upon the dangerous plant. The argument was surprisingly charged, with both of them arguing that they should be the ones attacking. Saurian argued that his soul defenses were better than Zack's by far and that they couldn't afford to get into the habit of triggering premature restarts. Zack, on the other hand, argued this was dumb and that he should definitely be the one making the attempt. Saurian might have much better soul defenses, but if they proved to be insufficient, he could wind up permanently dead in all future restarts. In light of that sort of risk, who cares about a single interrupted restart? This is beyond stupid, Zack told him. You don't even like fighting. But I fight when I have to, Saurian countered. Besides, I think you're exaggerating the level of danger I would be in. If you see me slump dead, immediately kill yourself. That will trigger a restart and get my soul out of its stomach. I doubt the chrysanthemum can mutilate my soul in such a short time. Zack scowled at him. Any plan that involves me committing suicide is a bad plan. I swear, I still can't believe you were wearing a bomb around your neck before getting control of your restart trigger. Actually, I still carry a bomb around my neck, Saurian told him, showing Zack the plain-looking golden chain he usually kept tucked into his shirt. His spell formula skills had advanced to such an extent by now that the chain was no longer obviously a magic item. Unless one specifically decided to inspect it with analytic spells, it would look just like a mundane accessory. Having more contingencies is always useful after all. So I guess you have a point. I don't think I'd fail here, but the worst scenario is worrying. Tell you what, I will agree to back off here, but if you fail and end up cutting the restart short, I get to confront the chrysanthemum the next time around. Deal. Deal, Zack nodded. If I can't do it now, I probably won't be able to do it on the second or third attempts either. I guess it is kind of unreasonable of me to cut restart after restart short like that. I still feel an urge to hit myself when I think of all the restarts I frittered away by doing just that. Then Zack started walking towards the flower, and all their arguments were revealed to have been moot. The soul-sizer chrysanthemum twisted itself to face them both, the flower stalk moving with the speed and fluidity alien to normal plants, and a barely perceptible ripple emanated from it, covering a spherical area easily large enough to cover them both. They had been within its striking range all along. It just chose not to attack them immediately. Fast and omnidirectional, the ethereal ripple released by the chrysanthemum was impossible to dodge. Saurian, caught off guard by the attack, could do nothing except take it head-on. Zack, having expected some kind of response from the flower, had successfully erected a shield around himself before it hit. It didn't matter, though. The ripple passed through the shield like it wasn't there at all. It slammed into both of them at almost the same time, sending them reeling. Saurian felt sick in a way he had never experienced before in his life. His vision swam, assailed by numberless fleeting illusions and flashing lights, and his ears felt like a bomb had gone off right next to him. His sense of balance went completely haywire, his skin stung all over and his stomach churned like something was trying to tear itself out of him. It took a monumental act of will not to vomit all over himself and collapse on the ground. It was some kind of stun attack, Saurian realized. An incredibly complex stun attack, weaving together physical, mental, and spiritual aspects into one unified whole. Saurian reached into his own mind and forcibly shattered the mental aspect of the stun. The whole structure of the attack immediately became unbalanced, allowing Zorian to stabilize his condition somewhat. His vision cleared up a bit and he saw Zack collapse to his knees, hands shaking and vomit all over the forest floor. That wasn't much of a surprise, to be honest. Zack was not as adept as Zorian in defending either his mind or his soul, and he was closer to the chrysanthemum when it attacked. Before Zorian could do anything, the Soul-Sizer chrysanthemum turned towards him. Perhaps because he had weathered its stun effect better than Zack, or because he was closer to the border of its attack radius and it worried he would flee, but the flower chose to deal with him first. Its multitude of petals erupted with ghostly blue flame and unfolded like a mouth full of teeth, revealing a pitch-black area in the middle of the flower. Zorian's soul immediately started vibrating in his body, sending waves of pain throughout his very being. Normally, this level of soul attack would never be able to seriously threaten Zorian, but with the after effect of the stun still lingering, resisting the pull of the flower was proving difficult. And the effect wasn't stopping. Instead, the suction only seemed to get stronger as time went by and the flower searched for a firmer grip on his soul. Despite that, Zorian was not worried. Before it attacked, the flower felt just like any other plant in the forest. It had no discernible mind and thus nothing that Zorian could target with his mind magic. Now, however, he could very much feel a thinking mind behind the chrysanthemum. He gathered all of his concentration and then launched a massive telepathic attack at the plant's mind. This time it was the flower's turn to reel back in shock. Its attack on Zorian's soul immediately ceased as it silently shook and waved around, trying to stabilize itself. Zorian wasn't going to let it have the time. Even though he still hadn't entirely recovered from the initial attack, he poured all of his energies into launching one mental attack after another. The flower resisted fiercely. It was clearly a complete amateur when it came to mental combat, but it possessed an instinctive ability to form mental barriers and was armed with a powerful magic resistance that made it difficult and mana expensive for Zorian to target it. After a while, Zack recovered enough to make his own move. He summoned a massive ghostly blade and sent it chopping down at the stem of the plant. In all honesty, it looked like complete overkill and Zorian worried he was going to ruin the chrysanthemum's value as an alchemical component. They needed it fairly intact after all. The flower was undaunted though. Threatened by the incoming blade, it spat a stream of glittering stars out of the black hole in the center of the flower. The glittering motes of light immediately arranged themselves into a dome-like construct that stopped the blade cold with barely a flicker. They were soul cores of creatures the chrysanthemum had devoured in the past, Zorian realized. Somehow, it could control them and shape them into defensive constructs. Well, not just defensive constructs, it turned out. After Zack and Zorian kept hammering its defenses for a while, it realized that at the rate things were going it was going to lose. Its shield was going to get battered down sooner or later, and Zorian's strategically launched mental attacks were disrupting its attempts to launch further soul attacks at them. Upon realizing this, the chrysanthemum reshaped the soul cores into a series of long hair-like whips and started flailing them around. Zorian at first thought the chrysanthemum intended to attack them with those, but it turned out he had once again underestimated the plant. It quickly wrapped the whips around the nearby branches and uprooted itself right out of the ground before turning to flee. Zorian had to admit, seeing an uprooted flower swing about from branch to branch like some kind of weird monkey was a unique experience. Sadly for the Soul-Sizer chrysanthemum, such desperate measures would not save it. It launched another stunning pulse at them in an attempt to lose them, and this did slow them down quite a bit, but in the end it was chased down and killed. "We have been outsmarted and nearly killed by a flower," Zack said, still keeping a wary distance from the chrysanthemum's remains. "We are never speaking about this again." Zorian readily agreed to this request. Break. The esoteric order of the Celestial Dragon, known to most people as the Cult of the World Dragon, was more than just a weird religion. It was an entire support organization that helped its members advance forward in life. They vouched for their fellow members when skills and trustworthiness were questioned. They helped them get the jobs and mentorships they needed to advance in their careers, offered their members loans under favorable conditions, granted free access to spell libraries that would be too restricted or expensive for members to otherwise get, and they provided legal aid if members got into trouble with the Mage Guild. The higher ranking one had in the cult, the more pronounced these advantages got. This was the main reason why the cult got so powerful and widespread. The sort of large-scale, highly treasonous plot that the cult was currently participating in was not really something that they usually did. It was actually very, very atypical. For the vast majority of their existence, they had simply been a mystery cult crossed with a mutual aid society, kind of shady and disreputable, but nothing that the authorities would go too crazy over. Their biggest enemy was the Triumvirate Church and their faithful, which considered the cult's beliefs to be a direct affront to their dogma. In any case, an expansive organization like that had more than just direct members of their secret club to draw upon. They also had a multitude of outside associates and other experts that sporadically worked with them. Some of these were true faithful that deliberately maintained distance from the main organization so that outsiders could not easily puzzle out the connections between them. Others were just mercenaries that sporadically took missions from the cult, and some simply didn't know who exactly they were working with. Zorian had largely ignored these people during his investigation into the cult's activities, since tracking them all down was an incredibly time-consuming and difficult task. He had better things to do with his time. Then Olenek interrogated Sudamir a bunch of times, and they discovered that the crazy mayor of Nyazovdvary had detailed knowledge of these people. Sudamir appeared to have gone out of his way to gather as much information about the cult as possible, worried that they might move against him at some point. The relations between him and cult leadership hadn't been the best since they realized he intended to publicly advocate for the legalization of necromancy, something they regarded as lunacy. Zorian still wasn't terribly interested in spending time to investigate all these people. He didn't think that would result in anything substantial. But Olenek was, and he didn't have too many other things vying for his time. Thus, he wholeheartedly threw himself into the investigation, making full use of the time loop to comb through every lead and scrap of evidence Zorian could wrench from Sudamir's mind. And today that effort seemed to have borne some kind of fruit. Olenek had notified Zack and Zorian that he had uncovered something important and told them to meet him next to an unassuming house in one of Sioria's richer neighborhoods. When they arrived, they found the place cordoned off by the Mage Guild personnel, but they had been notified that the two of them were coming and let them through on Alanek's orders. Once again Zorian wondered just what position Olenek occupied that he could command people like this. But Olenek stubbornly refused to answer such questions, and Zorian respected the man's help too much to go prying into his thoughts. "You called, we came," Zack said, waving his hand at Olenek to get his attention. "What do you have for us?" "I don't claim to understand every detail of the situation you have found yourselves in," Olenek said, choosing his words carefully due to the presence of other people in the room. "But I believe you've indicated the name Veyers Boranova is important to you, yes?" Zorian looked at him in shock. What does Veyers have to do with this? Is he here?" Zack asked. "In a matter of speaking," Olenek said evenly. He motioned them to follow him and led them down the stairs and into the basement beneath the house. "This is the house of one of the lawyers deeply associated with the cult of the World Dragon. He is not a member, but he has helped on a number of occasions and is known to be sympathetic to their organization. I managed to get authorization to conduct a search of his house and, well, this is what I found when I opened the icebox in his basement." Olenek stopped next to one of the 3 iceboxes lined up next to the basement wall and unceremoniously lifted the lid up. Inside was a frozen body of a teenage male, a peaceful expression on his frosted face. It was unmistakably Veyers Boranova. Zack and Zorian stared at the body for nearly half a minute, not saying anything. "He's dead?" Zack asked lamely. "Indeed," Olenek said. "I hear neither of you really got along with him well, so I will not offer you condolences." "So the owner of this house," Zorian began uncertainly. "Jornak Dokakin," Olenek told him. "Yes, this Jornak. Did he kill Veyers?" Zorian asked. "When did this happen?" "He is adamant that he did not kill the boy," Olenek said. "He claims the boy died of unknown causes while sleeping. One day he was fine, if a little surly, and the next day Jornak went into his room to check up on him and found him dead in his bed. I'd normally scoff at that explanation, but the timing. He died on the first day of the restart, didn't he?" Zack guessed. "Yes," Olenek nodded. "The frost damage and the sheer passage of time make it difficult to tell for certain, but I'm pretty sure this is the same situation like those Arania beneath Sioria and the mercenaries that were found mysteriously dead in their homes. Doesn't that mean Veyers was soul killed?" Zack frowned. "He isn't Red Robe?" "We can't say that just from this," Zorian said, shaking his head. We have no idea how exactly he entered the time loop or what would happen if he left it. For all we know, this could be the natural result of his leaving the time loop. Ugh, Zack grumbled. So we found Veyers and yet learned nothing of value. I hate things like this. Well, anyway, I guess Veyers being frozen in the basement of a heavily warded house does explain why we never managed to find him when we searched for him in the previous restarts. What was he doing here anyway? Jornak has been disinclined to cooperate with us in this regard, Olenek told them. He refuses to discuss details with me. He is a lawyer, so he is harder to shake up and interrogate than most people I deal with. That's why I told you to come here immediately. If you want to get anything out of him, we need to talk to him now. I'm afraid House Boranova has already heard of the news and is going to descend here sooner or later. Olenek then led them to the second floor of the house, where Jornak was currently under house arrest with a couple of guards posted next to him. When they arrived, they found Jornak pacing around his room like a caged tiger, angry and agitated. He deliberately ignored their entrance, not giving them so much as a glance. Zorian observed the man in the room itself. Jornak was younger than he thought he would be, probably in his mid-20s and with a very handsome boyish face. He was immaculately dressed in expensive but conservative clothes, and the room he was in seemed to be designed to maximize his image as a cultured, well-read intellectual. The walls were lined with filled-out bookshelves and small works of art laid scattered around the place to give it a bit of artistic flair. Zorian's parents had a similar room back in Siren. Much like them, Jornak had probably never even read most of the books lining the bookshelves. So Mr. Dokakin, Olenek began. I'm back. Don't mind my two helpers here, they're just here as support. Now that you've had a chance to calm down a little, are you willing to discuss things like a civilized person? Zorian gave Olenek a mildly questioning glance. Was he deliberately pissing the guy off? Jornak did not look calm at all. Olenek did not react to his silent question though, so Zorian simply trusted him to know what he was doing. He supposed that with him here, it hardly mattered whether Jornak wanted to talk or not. Jornak finally deigned to look at them, giving Zack and Zorian a brief, contemptuous glance before dismissing them as unimportant. Your church really likes them young, doesn't it, priest? Jornak said, grimacing at Olenek unhappily. I know my rights, Mr. Zosk. I will not talk to anyone until Mage Guild representatives and my lawyer arrive. Until then, I will patiently wait here, and I'd appreciate it if you stopped wasting my time. Curious that a lawyer would want someone else to defend them, Olenek said. A surgeon would be foolish to try to operate on himself, and a lawyer is ill-advised to represent himself in court, Jornak said dismissively. I would not expect a church dog to understand these things. People like you always think you're above the law anyway. Olenek hummed, completely unaffected by Jornak's caustic comments. I'll be honest and say I expected as much. Zorian did not ask Olenek what he wanted. He already knew. He reached out mentally towards Jornak. The young lawyer actually had rudimentary mental defenses, but this was not something that could stop Zorian. He punched through those defenses as if they were paper and pressed down on the man's mind. Jornak's eyes widened like saucers as he realized what was happening. Answer the questions, Zorian commanded. And no. Jornak protested. This is illegal. Oh, damn it. Damn it. Did you kill Veyers? Zorian asked just to be sure. I didn't kill him. I didn't kill anyone. I already said I just found him dead one day. It's the truth. What was he doing in your home? Zorian asked. We were friends, Jornak said, gritting his teeth. A friendship between a 15-year-old boy and a 25-year-old man like you? Olenek commented lightly. Who is it that likes them young again? You people, Jornak hissed angrily at him. He took a deep breath and forcibly calmed himself down. I promise to tell you the whole story. Just release me from your mental compulsion. It's hard to think with this thing muddying my thoughts. Zorian gave Olenek a questioning glance. Olenek nodded for him to do as Jornak said, apparently willing to give the man a chance. Fair enough. He supposed they could always repeat the procedure if Jornak became uncooperative later on. I'm still keeping an eye on your surface thoughts, Zorian told him as he released the compulsion to make him talk. So don't try to lie to us. I don't have to lie. Jornak snapped at him. This whole thing is just, damn it, Veyers. Even when dead he still makes trouble for me. Yeah, he has that effect on people, Zach said with a sagely nod. Jornak ignored that comment, gathering his thoughts for a moment. All right, Jornak said. So, I met Veyers almost a year ago when he came to talk to me about his legal options in regards to his situation in his house. I empathized with him then. What happened to him reminded me a little of myself. I too have had my birthright stolen from me. Really? Zach asked curiously. I don't want to talk about it and I ask you to be merciful and not force me, Jornak said. It has nothing to do with this and you can find out most of it through public documents. It's not like I've ever hid my grievances after all. Just give us the short version, Olenek said. Jornak gave him a hateful look, but after glancing at Zorian for a second he decided to humor the scarred battle priest anyway. In short, I was a relative of a small house that went extinct some time ago. Although not a true member of the house, I was the closest thing to a descendant and I was supposed to inherit their wealth and properties. But then a new claimant suddenly appeared, completely out of nowhere, claiming even closer relations. His proof of his lineage was painfully fake and all the documents obvious forgeries, but he was better connected than me and in the end, courts assigned everything to him and left me with nothing. I see, Olenek said. And so you saw young Veyers coming to you for help and felt touched by this young man that was seeing his legacy usurped from him by branch members of his house. Yes, precisely, Jornak said. In truth, I couldn't help him much. Formal houses like his own are given a lot of leeway in how they govern themselves internally, and general law is only somewhat applicable to his situation. Still, the boy seemed to appreciate my advice and the fact that I cared, which not many people around him did if he was to be believed. And him coming to live inside your home? Zorian prompted. That, he was expelled from his school? Jornak said, frowning. Well, he didn't want to go back to his family after that. After wandering all over the city to cool down, he came over to my house and begged me to house him for a few days. He said he needed a place to hide for a while and think about what to do about things. How could I refuse? That's very generous of you and I mean that sincerely, Zorian said. But how does that lead to his body being stuffed into your icebox? I didn't know what to do, okay? Jornak said, becoming agitated. I just came into his guest room one morning to see why he missed breakfast and found him dead. I didn't know what to do. Despite all his problems, he was still a noble and House Boranova would never take this lying down. He died in my home and the wards didn't register any intruder at all. How would I possibly explain this? I empathize with the boy but I don't want to ruin my life for him. Haven't I suffered enough? Jornak gritted his teeth and started pulling at his hair in frustration. With a sharp turn, he started pacing around the room again, gesticulating to himself and muttering under his breath. It wasn't an act as far as Zorian could tell. Jornak had never bothered to reform his mental barriers after Zorian destroyed them, leaving his thoughts completely unguarded. Everything he said was truth as he saw it and he was honestly panicking and unsure what to do. So, this could be a dumb question, but why keep Veyers' body in the icebox in your basement? Zach asked suddenly. I didn't know what else to do, Jornak said, still pacing around the room. If I took it out of the house to dump somewhere, the trackers hired by House Boranova would find me the moment I stepped out of my house's privacy wards. As for destroying it, well, I've never destroyed a body before. I mean, obviously I didn't. How would I know how to do that? So I put the body on ice while trying to think up a solution. They didn't find out much from Jornak after that. Although Zorian personally found the man's choices to be rather questionable, he was ultimately just a man who found a dead teenager in his guest room and panicked. If Jornak hadn't knowingly helped the cult of the World Dragon so many times in the past, Zorian would have even felt sorry for the man. About 15 minutes after Zach and Zorian left Jornak's room, another group of Mage Guild personnel arrived, accompanied by several representatives from noble House Boranova, and took over the scene. Olenek informed Zach and Zorian that this marked the end of his involvement with the case, and thus the end of their ability to examine the house or question the man. It was just as well, though. The restart was coming to a close, so there was not much time for a detailed examination. Additionally, it would have been better if they arrived in the man's house at the start of the restart, before he had a chance to stuff Veyers' body in an icebox. And in the next restart they would do just that. Until then, Zach and Zorian agreed to keep speculation about what this meant about Red Robe to a minimum. Despite numerous issues that had cropped up in their search, In the end, Zack and Zorian managed to gather all the ingredients Silver Lake needed, or at least claimed she needed, for a soul perception potion. It took them most of the remaining time to do so, however, and by then the end of the restart was looming close. Thus, they were somewhat anxious as they waited for Silver Lake to finish making the potion. "It should work," Silver Lake told them. "I mean, I've never actually made that specific potion in my life, and the old witch recipe that describes it is not nearly as clear and precise as the modern recipes you two are familiar with, but since it's me making the attempt, it will probably work out fine." Yes, we get it, you're awesome," Zack said with a tired nod. "And don't you forget it," Silver Lake said shamelessly. "It shouldn't take long. Gathering the ingredients is the time-consuming part. The actual potion making could be done in as little as 2 hours. You two go play outside while I work. You can practice your pocket dimension creation skills or something. You have a real gift for finding exceptionally infuriating teachers, Zorian," Zack told him after they got out of Silver Lake's earshot. "Yes, but they tend to be exceptionally capable ones too," Zorian countered. He took out a small box from his jacket pocket and flipped it upside down, allowing a stream of marbles to pour out of the box and into his waiting palm. A moderately perceptive person would quickly realize that there was no way all these marbles could fit into such a small box,